We are here. We are on the road to WrestleMania. I don't know where we are, but we are on the road here on the Drive-Thru. And there's so much to talk about. We have a Dynamite review. We have, of course, the usual week of everyone behaving like a maniac. And quotes about you, actually.
I was about to, everybody's off that Tony Khan listens to the program, apparently. But they're at me because he listens. They're like, well, him. Well, what the do I have to, I can't. Do we have to vet our entire listenership? That could take a while going around the globe.
Well, since you opened this topic, why don't we just open with this topic? Let me pull up the actual quotes here because, again...
I didn't mean to take over your program, Brian. I'm a humble public servant here trying to do the best I can to make myself fucking silly and happy today.
Well, I have a quote here. This is a quote from Jimmy Jacobs. Remember Jimmy Jacobs? He was a Ring of Honor wrestler.
Yes, I've worked with Jimmy Jacobs many, many times.
Well, he previously had been working for AEW.
He was my producer at the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony 2017.
And how did he do? Easy to work with?
He did great because he said, "Can we go over your speech?" I said, "I don't have one. I got this fucking handwritten, legal pad paper with some bullet points that I was going to kind of tell stories in the middle of them." And he said, "Don't thank Vince." I said, "I didn't plan on it." He said, "Well, he doesn't like that." I said, "I know. I've been through it 20 years ago." And then I said, "Don't worry. I won't say anything that'll get you fired." And then we chatted about Ring of Honor and went on our way. But he's a nice young man.
I won't do anything to get you fired. You could handle that yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's up to everybody. Everybody's an individual. But I didn't want to take it upon myself, just be greedy or anything.
Well, Jimmy Jacobs was working for AEW. He was Tony Khan's shadow man, body man. He was with him everywhere. And then he was gone, and we saw a lot of finger pointing at that point. People saying he was responsible for this, or he wasn't responsible for this. But of course, he's not the overall booker. You could only blame him for so much. Here's a quote from an interview Jimmy Jacobs did with Body Slam. Whatever that may be, not the movie, not M. Harry Smilac. We would drive for hours from one show to the next. And Tony would always be there, talking about wrestling, his vision for AEW, and just soaking in everything. It was a chance to really bond over the things that matter, like how we want to shape the future of wrestling. Tony and I would listen to Jim Cornette's podcast during those drives.
But I see, I'm wanting to be with him because he's talking about listening to the show, but right after you say how we want to shape the future of wrestling. Well, I know how I'd like to shape the future of the stock market, but I've got about as much chance of doing that as they do of shaping the future of fucking wrestling. When you think about it, but go ahead. Tony, I don't want, don't want that to go unrecognized.
Tony and I would listen to Jim Cornette's podcast during those drives, and it became a thing. Sometimes we'd agree, sometimes we'd disagree. But what was most important was the passion behind what Cornette said. It was always about respecting the history of wrestling and understanding what makes the business work. Cornette's a polarizing figure, but you can't deny that he knows wrestling. Tony would often ask me, "Do you agree with Jim on this?" It wasn't about agreeing with him necessarily, but more about understanding where he was coming from and applying that knowledge to what we were doing in AEW. So let's stop there, get your general thoughts. The fact that A, they're going town to town, working one show a week. They're going town to town. They're going town to town in the car listening to the podcast. And Tony would literally quiz Jimmy Jacobs. Do you agree with him on this? So what are your thoughts?
Well, without knowing a specific, for instance, as Aunt Lola would say, give me a for instance. What would this matter or this topic or whatever, who was with it and who was against it? But I just overall don't see how, if they're listening and just 50% of the time, somebody ought to, on average, right? Unless you're just completely diametrically opposite on opinions of everything, You ought to agree. And then why are they listening if they're diametrically opposite? And I know Jimmy Jacobs has some element of old school philosophy in terms of logic because he's been around for a while and he worked in the evil empire, and you have to develop some of that there. So I don't know his tone. He said, well, I don't agree with any of this. And Jimmy's like, well, I don't want to fucking die on that hill. I don't know what's going on here. But it seems like if they're listening, couldn't something register just in terms of the excess or the unnecessary risks or the self-inflicted wounds, as they say, or just the talent management? I don't know what. Is it the old Steve Allen line where, they say, Mr. Allen, do they get your show in Cleveland? He said, well, they watch it. I'm not sure they get it. What's happening here, Brian? I don't know how to explain it.
Maybe it's that other famous Steve Allen line. Hey, where's my hairpiece? I don't know. I think my question would be, it's not a surprise that Tony listens to the show. And quite frankly, if you pay close attention, it shouldn't be a surprise that things that have been said on this show have found their way onto AEW
into
television.
The presentation.
Yeah. It may not be applied the same way that it was supposed to be, but there have been things said on this show directly have affected things on TV and been things on TV. Knowing he listens to the show, he's driving around with his writers, his main guy, Jimmy Jacobs at that point, listening to the show. That's not the only person who has listened to the show with Tony, I can tell you that. Does it bother you that although they apply certain things said on this show to the television show and have for 4 or 5 years, the big points don't seem to sink in? Or the big issues nothing seems to change Tony's path. It's just that he'll wonder what a booker he admired like you would have done in that situation.
Well, at first it was the mocking stuff, like, when the Cucamonga kids have the fight out in the parking lot, and in the back of the truck is the little stand-up sandwich sign, Outlaw Mud Show, Arrow this way or whatever. They're little inside jokes when they first started, and they were full of piss and vinegar. And then more recently it's become, remember we call it, every once in a while, they're trying to take the constructive criticism. This guy actually sold something, but in the midst of the shitstorm, it was, lost in the shuffle or whatever. They've tried to, an individual talent, I think, tries to up their presentation, as they say, or their game, or certain things they do that potentially we may have called upon. So it's more positive. But overall, as I said a few weeks ago, they've dug themselves such a hole where the people perceive they have no real stars except for the bubble that put them over as stars and have convinced them that they are bigger stars than they are. And the fact that they have numbed the fan base to every angle, possible to be done to human bodies, and endless multiple man chaos over and over in the arenas. So you can't really shoot an angle. So it's just the bad booking has come home to roost. I don't know what else to say.
Well, hopefully Tony, if he's listening, will keep listening and heeding what you say. And apply some of it to his programming, because obviously it's not a secret he needs help. And it's also not a secret that he's pretty stubborn about it and he thinks he knows best. But boy, do they need help right now. It's sad.
Well, but then there is the problem that we've talked about before on a talent roster, but otherwise, who is the help? Which one of these creative geniuses that have his ear, or any others out there? Who is the guy that can come in and straight up? Paul Heyman would go, oh my God.